area in which the Labour Party was criticized heavily, Madam Speaker. A lot of it unjustly so. In fact, it is well known that in 2003, we left behind a debt stock of $2.8 billion. Now, Madam Speaker, $2.8 billion included accrued interest. A number of those loans were in arrears and had significant amounts of accrued interest. So the principal was not 2.8. In fact, Madam Speaker, the principal was less than 1.5 billion. But be that as it may, I will use the figure of 2.8 billion. And if you take the arithmetic average, Madam Speaker, you'd get on average $100 million a year in borrowings. Now let us look at what is happening under the UPP government. Because they brag, they say that the Labour Party borrowed extensively. I'll show you what is happening under the UPP. The UPP government, Madam Speaker, plans to borrow in the region of $800 million by the end of 2007. Let me repeat that. Madam Speaker, by the end of 2007, the UPP government would have incurred up to $800 million in debts. And let me justify them. The bonds and treasury bills that were issued this year, $150 million. The Transport Board, even though you may want to argue it's a statutory corporation, if they don't pay, the central government will have to pay. It's a contingent liability. The bus terminal, the ill-conceived bus terminal, Madam Speaker, $65 million. The budget deficit for 2007, which is estimated at $400 million, will be funded by borrowings. Where you got information from? The budget statement, Madam Speaker. $60 million from ABIB for the stadium. The government of Venezuela, 108 million EC dollars, Madam Speaker. Where did I get those figures from? The budget. A total of $800 million, representing, Madam Speaker, an annual borrowing rate of $267 million per year. A factor of 2.7 times that of the Labour Party. Now, Madam Speaker, if you decide to adjust the figures for inflation, and we know inflation has been low, on average about 2%, and you decide, okay, we're going to deflate the $800 million to $600 million to compare like with like, you're looking at an average of $200 million a year in borrowings under the UPP, at least 2 to 1. So when they speak about borrowings, Madam Speaker, there's hardly any difference. In fact, Madam Speaker, just like the Labour Party, they have used borrowings as a policy instrument. And in fact, based on the rate at which they're going, they certainly would have done far worse than the Antigua Labour Party. Now, the member for Rural East, Madam Speaker, traveled extensively to raise $100 million in bonds. Apparently, some were issued at 8.25%, some at 8.5%. And if you had to take in consideration the fees for arranging these bonds, or commissions, whatever you call them, all the travel expenses, Madam Speaker, I guarantee you that the net cost would have been in the region of 9%. Now, he made it sound as though that was a major achievement. The reality is, if you look at the estimates, Madam Speaker, you would see that the Antigua Labour Party government issued bonds at 9%. And the thing about it, these were over-the-counter bonds. So it's not even the case to say that, you had a lot of demand for these bonds. And we issued them at 9%. And at 9%, Madam Speaker, when interest rates were extremely high. Now today, Madam Speaker, that interest rates are extremely low, the member is bragging about selling $100 million in bonds at 8.5%, or 8.25 to 8.5%. That is not any major achievement. In fact, the member here for St. Peter, Madam Speaker, has borrowed the equivalent within a matter of minutes by picking up the telephone, not by traveling the entire hemisphere. And basically, Madam Speaker, would have gotten a better rate than the 8.5%.